again, everyone. We are looking at the markets, and as you can see, we are looking at the dashboard with the dollar index futures followed by the major currencies. And as you can see on the far left, you have the dollar index futures on the hourly chart. We got the yen, Swiss franc, and the Canadian across the top, and then you have the euro, the pound, the Australian dollar across the bottom. What's interesting to note here is that what we're looking at is 2 weeks worth of data. As you can see here, this is last week's data, and then we have this week's data. And what I do is I identify last week's high and last week's low, and I pay attention to if the market is able to trade inside or outside of that trading range. As you can see over here, dollar index, and I compare it to what we're looking at in the rest of the market. So as you can see, the dollar index futures early on in this week ran into some resistance here at last week's high, and then proceeded to trade lower, even trading below last week's closing price. You can see this is last week's closing price, and then going lower, trying to push down into last week's low, but was not able to move down into last week's low, which tells us that the bulls were able to come in and support the level right here at 79.70. But the important thing is the impact on the rest of the currencies. So we'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. But towards the end of the week, as you can see, the dollar index futures found support, found a little bit of buying, and then rallied, ultimately pushing above last week's high, and sure enough, closing above last week's high. This is very important in terms of weekly events. Whenever I look at what happens throughout the week, were we able to trade outside of last week's trading range? And as you can see here, the dollar index future found resistance. The first time it came up to this level, was not able to come down anywhere near last week's low, which showed us that the buyers were still in force, and then the buyers proved that they were in control by taking the dollar index above last week's high. And that, of course, had its impact on the euro, the pound, the Australian dollar. As you can see here, the euro ran into support at last week's low, right about the time that the dollar index was finding resistance at last week's high. And that correlates to exactly what you saw there in the dollar index. And then sure enough, we had a little bit of a rally up here, moving up above last week's closing price in the euro, finding resistance, not able to move above 130. So that kind of shows you why the dollar index was not able to move down below 79.70. Most importantly, running into a psychological level here at 130, and then finding the sellers before moving down and pushing significantly, or at least closing below last week's low. As you can see, finally today, Friday, finally able to move down below last week's low in the euro. And if you were paying attention here, 28.75, 28.81 turned out to be a pretty decent entry there, and you can see that it took you all the way down to 28.25. That alone right there, if you were waiting all week just for that, that would have been a pretty decent trade setup. And at the same time, when we take a look at the pound here, as you can see, the pound definitely tried to break out last week's high, but found the sellers just about the same time that the euro found its sellers, and the dollar found its buyers, and then found itself pulling back into last week's trading range right about to this week's low. Was not able to make its way down towards last week's low in the pound, but hey, you can see the confirmation here where the pound found resistance right about the same time that the euro found resistance, and the same thing proved to be the case here in the Australian dollar, where we tried to break out of last week's high, similar to the pound, found the sellers, and then sure enough was not able to maintain any strength. As you can see, the euro, pound, and the Australian dollar failing to hold their gains into the back end of the week. And on the flip side, as you can see here, the Japanese yen typically is what we like to say is a misfit over the past couple of years. It doesn't really do what it used to do in terms of why I have it on this dashboard. It used to actually correlate very well with the dollar. But you can see here that we did put in the low right around 79, let's call it 79.30 or so, and it did kind of tie into the dollar index. You can see the dollar index finished strong in the week, and the same thing with the Japanese yen breaking out of last week's high. As you can see here, 80.37 was the breakout point, taking you all the way to, let's say, 65 or so. That's a nice 30 pip run. Nice little scalp for you if you're paying attention to that. But most importantly, what we're looking at here is that the Swiss franc was able to mimic the dollar index futures, finding a low right about the same time that the dollar did. In the euro finding its high, the pound finding its high, the Australian dollar. You can see here that the Swiss franc found its low and then recovered off of that and ultimately finished above last week's high, 93.85, the breakout point. And you can see here 94.20 was a little bit of a slack, or should we say a little bit of a opportunity there for you in the Swiss franc. The interesting thing here is that typically what I expect is the Canadian dollar to work in the same fashion as the dollar index futures. You can see that we broke out of last week's high similar to the Swiss franc, but we were not able to maintain that strength, falling below the big parity level, which is very interesting here. The Canadian dollar back down below big parity and pushing down to 99.20 before actually finding support here. But overall, what we look for here is that if the dollar is going up, which is what it did towards the back end of the week, I like to see if the yen, the Swiss franc, and the Canadian dollar will do the same. And at the same time, the pound and the euro and the Australian dollar will go down. So ultimately, it looked okay, which is interesting. The Canadian dollar here was the only one that was the misfit that did not cooperate with the overall sentiment. But as you can see, dollar index futures breaking above last week's high. And now what I'll be looking for going into next week high, next week for instance, is to see if the dollar index futures can continue the strength and to rally even further, which it does look if you look at the longer term time frames, which we'll take a look at in the premium videos. But overall, we have some significant developments here with the dollar index futures breaking out of a nice little range that we've been developing. The euro dollar breaking down below this triangle that has been developing on the daily charts, and sure enough, the pound filling in this channel that it tried to break out of as well. The Australian dollar finding some sellers, which it had bid, or should we say had found some strength over the past couple of weeks, but now we're actually seeing some selling. And so we'll see. We'll keep an eye on this, but overall, let's see if this dollar index continues to push higher in the next week, and that the euro dollar continues to push lower. That's all I got for this market wrap. This is the Wish Doctor signing off. I hope it helps. Good luck to your trading. Stay safe out there. Best regards to all, and we'll see you at the next market wrap. While I got you here, I wanted to take a quick moment to say that if you really liked what you're looking at here in the free Forex market wrap video, I wanted to give you the opportunity to come take a look at the premium weekly Forex market wrap video that I do every week. And basically it's a little bit more in depth, or should I say a lot more in depth information about the markets that I cover. And you can see here that in this short video I go over the basics about what I've been looking at on the major currencies. In the more in-depth market wrap video, I take a look at a in-depth analysis on the 6 major currency pairs. You also get actionable trading scenarios. The important thing here is that we're offering a 3-day risk-free trial, so you don't have to pay a cent. It's about a 30 to 45 minute video that'll go through all the major currency pairs that I look at, and it shows you a lot more in-depth analysis and forecast, looking at the longer term picture and the big major trends that are affecting what you're looking at on the lower time frames that you're looking at on a day-to-day basis. So take a moment to go take a look at the premium market wrap video. You can see the link here provided, www.traderstouch.com/3day, and it also includes a free membership to the Traders Learning Network, where you can meet other traders that are like-minded individuals, and they're basically there to help everybody looking at the same markets as you. So good luck, hope it helps, and look forward to seeing you on the inside.